This week on Waterways, the new Eco Discovery Center in Key West, and monitoring lobster populations in sanctuary preservation areas. South Florida, home to the Everglades and mass agricultural production. The Florida Keys, home to living coral reefs and affected by everything upstream. Managers working to protect the fragile coral reefs of the Keys, or the famous River of Grass of the Everglades, have long understood that they must look beyond their boundaries if they hope to succeed. From Lake Okeechobee to the deep ocean off the Florida Keys, the health of one habitat is directly linked to the health of the others.
There's no one agency that can comprehensively address the broad scope of issues and concerns that face the South Florida ecosystem. Each agency has a specific role, but what we have to do is integrate those roles into a comprehensive protection strategy.
Meeting the challenge of working together to protect the South Florida environment means finding ways to engage the region's many visitors and residents. As part of this goal, many partners came together in January of 2007 to celebrate the opening of a joint venture, the Florida Keys Eco Discovery Center in Key West, Florida. The creation of the Eco Discovery Center emerged from a partnership among the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, the National Park Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the South Florida Water Management District. The National Marine Sanctuary Foundation helped make the vision a reality by raising funds for the state-of-the-art interactive exhibits.
Well, the mission of the Park Service is to provide resources in perpetuity for the enjoyment of the American public and for international visitors as well. And one of the principal objectives of this center is to provide a platform for educational activities and programs so that children of all ages and also adults can learn about this fabulous resource, know the complexities are involved in managing it, and also that what they can do to help. And we think this is a wonderful place to provide a platform for that kind of educational program, and that they could also take things that they've learned at the center and change the way that they conduct their daily lives as well.
The Eco Discovery Center introduces visitors to the myriad of South Florida's habitats. Mary Taglariti, who oversaw the development of the center, has volunteered to give the Waterways audience a first look tour.
So this map shows how everything is connected, from the water coming down in the Everglades to the water coming up through the Gulf Stream, and how they're all connected by water. And then as we go through the center here, we'll see how the different habitats are also connected. So we're going to start out at the hardwood hammocks. The hardwood hammocks is the highest elevation in the Florida Keys. This important habitat is a place for the songbirds that live in the east and the Midwest. When they come through, they'll stop and feed in these areas in the winter time, and it has just a myriad of life in it. We have many endangered species that use the hardwood hammock for a home: the south swallowtail butterfly, the cottonmouth, the Key Largo wood rat. So from the hardwood hammock, we go on down to the mangroves. The mangroves are really a link between land and sea. The tree itself may be up on land, but its roots reach out into the sea and provide a home for a lot of fish and crabs and other invertebrates. There are thousands of mangrove islands in the Florida Keys, but there are very few beaches. But the beaches we have are really important. Sea turtles, an endangered species, will come up on the beach and nest. Seagrass is the most common habitat that we have in the marine sanctuary. However, it's the one that people probably know the least about. The seagrass acts as a nursery and a feeding ground for many different species, especially ones that we all enjoy, such as lobster, snapper, stone crab. However, this exhibit also shows you the human side of what we're doing to the seagrass and the damage that we're causing to it. It also shows you how you can help us protect it by learning how to boat correctly so that you don't run aground. From seagrass, we're going to move into the hard bottom exhibit. Hard bottom is our most overlooked type of reef habitat here in the Florida Keys. It's really important in that it has a lot of holes and nooks and crannies for the lobster, the immature fish, and other invertebrate and organisms to hide in. One of the reasons that hard bottom is overlooked is it doesn't have the large reef formations. It's more of soft corals and small hard corals. However, fish, when they move from nearshore habitats like the seagrass out to the outer reef, to the patch reefs and bank reefs, they utilize the hard bottom area as a stopping point along the way to forage and feed and to have protection from any predators.
Resource managers have realized the essential need to protect all habitats across ecosystems. For instance, if a lobster species is protected at the adult stage of their life at the offshore reef, but managers do not protect the seagrass habitat where they live as a juvenile, or a place where they spawn, then there will be limited, if any, success in the management of lobster.
Our tour continues to the bank reef. The bank reef, we've also highlighted shipwrecks, or the maritime heritage here in the Florida Keys. The bank reef stretches all along the coastline of the Keys, approximately 3 to 6 miles from shore. Centuries ago, there weren't lighthouses, you didn't have good charts, and it was difficult for captains and mariners to know where to go, or if a storm blew up. So we have recorded thousands of shipwrecks, and by getting that information on the shipwrecks, it brings to life that time from centuries ago when people sailed past the Florida Keys. It's amazing how many different parts there are to the South Florida ecosystem and here in the Florida Keys. The deep shelf, a place that not a lot of people visit simply because it's too deep for scuba diving or snorkeling, but again plays an intricate part in the makeup of the whole system. The Dry Tortugas is a very special place in more than one way. First, it has Fort Jefferson, which of course was built as a bastion for protection of the United States, but it's also very special underwater. Due to its remoteness, the Tortugas haven't felt as much of the impact of man as possibly some of the other reefs in the Florida Keys, so diving there is spectacular. The big yellow tube in the middle of the room is probably our most popular exhibit, and this is a model of the Aquarius habitat, which is on Conch Reef off of the Upper Keys. The Aquarius habitat is a place where scientists can go to live and learn about our marine environment underwater. They can stay down for about 10 days and do research 24 hours a day. One of the highlights of the Florida Keys Eco Discovery Center is the Florida Keys Discovery Theater. In the theater, we will have a 18-minute high-definition 7-channel surround sound movie, which gives you a fantastic introduction to the Florida Keys, from the hardwood hammock all the way through to the deep shelf, and really gives you a feel for what it's like to live and maybe even be an animal here in the Florida Keys out in the water.
I ventured from the sanctuary of the mangroves to the open seagrass beds.
Efforts to educate the larger population in Florida and the rest of the United States have always been a priority to these management agencies. Through newspaper articles, through television, through mailers, radio, and public meetings. This Eco Center will be the crowning achievement in the struggle to win the hearts and minds of anyone who's interested in this environmental legacy to their grandchildren.
The Florida Keys Eco Discovery Center has the potential to reach 3 million visitors as they visit the Keys and Key West each year. Imagine if we had to individually go out and target those folks with mailings or brochures. Those 3 million people know at least 20 people, so that's potentially 60 million people that we're reaching with this Eco Discovery Center. It's an investment on behalf of the American public, but one that we hope and trust will pay off.
Perhaps the most important lesson for visitors to take from their trip to the Eco Discovery Center is how difficult it is to balance the needs and demands put upon these South Florida habitats.
After you've done all of the exhibits and you've learned all about the different habitats, you get to become a manager. We give you a couple of scenarios and you try to make all of the citizens happy with your decisions on how to manage the environment. Good luck.
Visit the Florida Keys Eco Discovery Center in Key West, a place that celebrates the interconnectedness of South Florida's environments, a place that informs, educates, and entertains all who walk through the door. In 1997, the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary took a controversial step to protect the marine environment. After extensive public comment and an exhaustive planning process, managers designated 23 small areas as off-limits to fishing. The largest of these protected areas, Western Sambo Ecological Reserve, stretches over 9 square nautical miles, beginning at the shallows of the shoreline and extending past the main reef into 60 feet of water. The sanctuary determined the boundaries for these closed areas based upon the best scientific information available at the time. As soon as they were in place, scientists began monitoring their effects. One of the monitoring programs established focused on a species critical to the commercial fishing industry in the Florida Keys, the Caribbean spiny lobster.
So we started doing population surveys and looking at the size and the abundance of lobsters in the areas that became protected and right next door where the lobsters were still allowed to be fished. For the first 5 years, we did closed season surveys. So right before the lobster season began, so we went out and counted and measured lobsters every July. And then we would go back out again in September, October after about a month of the fishing season and look at the differences in the protected and exploited populations. We did that for 5 years, and then because Western Sambo Ecological Reserve showed such an increase in the abundance and the size of lobsters, we focused our efforts on continued monitoring in Western Sambo and its reference area, which happens to be Pelican Shoal.
Every year, in July, Lynn and her team conduct spiny lobster surveys. The survey area is divided into specific habitat types: seagrass, hard-bottom patch reefs, and the main coral reef. They conduct 3-hour-long surveys in each habitat. For each survey, 2 teams make 30-minute dives. With each dive, they collect lobsters. The data they gather is compared from year to year in an effort to detect the effectiveness that preservation areas have on spiny lobster populations.
When we find a lobster, we stop the time so that collection time is not incorporated in search time, and we attempt to catch all the lobsters that we see. One really important thing, I think, in terms of that sampling to make it consistent over time is of the team, only one person does the searching. So if the searcher misses a lobster, the catcher doesn't say, "Oh, here," because we really just want one set of eyes looking for lobsters in that 30 minutes.
Lynn and her team then measure all the lobsters. They record their sex and their molt condition. They also collect information about females' reproductive health and condition.
So we look to see if their ovaries are ripe. We look to see if they have a spermatophore, which is the sperm packet that the male places on their abdomen to scratch open and fertilize the eggs. We also look and record the condition of eggs, and we record information about what den the lobster was found in, and who else was living in that area. And then we return those lobsters to where we found them.
Cox's team also monitors the sanctuary's smaller closed areas, called sanctuary preservation areas, or spas. The sanctuary did not set aside the spas or the Western Sambo Reserve specifically to protect spiny lobster. The goals of the spas, most less than 1 square nautical mile in size, is to preserve the diversity of marine life at important reef sites. The goal of the Western Sambo Reserve is to protect the continuum of habitats used by marine life and serve as an example of a naturally functioning ecosystem. Both types of closed areas resulted in changes in spiny lobster populations. As would be expected, these changes were smaller in the spas and much more noticeable in the far larger reserve.
And we really didn't find an increase in abundance of lobsters, but they were bigger, but not much bigger than those outside. So what that told us was some of the lobsters are staying in there long enough to molt and grow and be bigger than those outside. In the rest of the reserves, after the first year of protection, there was a slight increase in size, but the abundance of lobsters during the closed fishing season really wasn't that different inside and outside the reserves. We would see a drop, obviously, in the number of lobsters in the fishery during the fishing season. But then it seemed like everybody walked around and sort of spread themselves out again, or the next crop of lobsters walked into the area. So things were fairly even in terms of number of lobsters inside and outside the reserves, except for in Western Sambo. And what we saw in Western Sambo Ecological Reserve, which again is a large reserve that extends from near shore out off the reef, we found that the lobsters not only increased dramatically in abundance, but the largest lobsters were larger. So we saw a shift in the size structure of the population and a large increase in the average size of lobsters in the first 10 years.
That big increase in size was particularly evident in the size structure of the male population, which is just as important as the female lobster size. Larger male lobsters mean more sperm per lobster, which results in more fertilized eggs. The bigger the lobster, the bigger the spawn, and the benefit of bigger spawns can reach beyond the boundaries of the spas. One of the benefits marine resource managers hope will result from closing an area is spillover. Spillover occurs when populations of marine life in a closed area become so dense that animals must leave the boundaries of the protected area in search of sufficient territory.
One of the desired outcomes of protecting an area is that the population inside that closed area will become larger, more abundant, have a larger biomass, and at some point the desire is that some of those lobsters, in our example, in the protected area will leave there and go into the fishery, and we call that spillover. We have done a directed study looking at spillover in the past, but I can tell you that this year in particular, in data that we haven't even had a chance to work up yet, in one of the fished areas we found a very large lobster, a very large male lobster, 148 millimeters carapace length, in an exploited area where we've never seen any lobsters bigger than maybe 115 millimeters. That lobster obviously did not grow up there, and all indications are that it came from the Western Sambo Ecological Reserve. It spilled over into the fishery, and it will be available for fishers to capture.
Spillover also occurs when the greater abundance and size of animals in a protected area results in an increased supply of larvae to areas downstream. Some larvae spawned in the Florida Keys remain in these waters and help to replenish local populations. But many Keys lobsters likely began their lives in foreign waters. By setting an example through management techniques such as closed areas and fishery regulations, resource managers in the U.S. hope to encourage other countries to protect their lobster populations and ensure a continued supply of larvae to our waters.
The lobsters that are coming into the nearshore areas and the nursery areas in the Florida Keys are of unknown origin because lobster larvae stay in the plankton for a very long time, 6 to 9 months. They can travel long distances on the ocean currents. So based on the larval lifespan and the ocean currents, we assume that our settlers come from other distant parts of the Caribbean, but we try to be the model for fishery regulations for other countries who have less information on the reproductive biology of lobsters in their area. And if we protect our resource, then hopefully we will be the model and other countries will protect their resource, which is feeding into our lobster population. We currently have an effort underway to determine the genetic makeup of the larvae and the large lobsters in the Florida Keys. And in that effort, we are making collections all over the Caribbean and doing genetics to try to determine where our larvae come from, basically.
Research conducted by Cox and her colleagues is also helping to provide the sanctuary with better information about how lobsters use different habitat types. Equipped with this knowledge, managers can propose adjusting the reserve boundaries to improve protection.
When we started this project, we had no expectation that lobsters would stay inside artificial boundaries of a no-take area. Many of the no-take areas are very small, and lobsters leave their dens to forage, and they could easily wander outside the protected area and be caught by recreational and commercial fishers. What we found in the first 5 years of monitoring was it just depended on the size of the reserve and the configuration of the habitat that's protected relative to how lobsters use that habitat. One of my colleagues is doing sonic tagging of lobsters, and he's finding that female lobsters go way offshore, potentially, to spawn outside of the reserve. So we have a directed effort to look at the habitat utilization of females in reproductive condition, and we may be able to give that information to the sanctuary so they can alter the size of that particular reserve.
With every year of study in the Western Sambo Ecological Reserve, researchers learn more. They learn about the natural life cycle of spiny lobsters that are protected from fishing. They learn how marine resource managers can design a reserve that works. Because the spiny lobster is such an important species for the Keys economy, these lessons are a benefit for people as well as for the spiny lobster.